Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the chat. I'm your host, Hugh Blink. I'm here with, let them know who you are. Just by.
Hey guys, I'm Danny Lore. I write comics, prose, all from the Bronx.
Word. What part of the Bronx?
Right now, I'm up Kingsbridge, but I've also lived in Hunts Point.
Oh, nice. Cool. So, what are you doing here at Flamecon today?
So I'm really fortunate enough to have a table. It's cool. They put me next to Luciano, who did the art for Champions and some of Team Justice. So it's really great to kind of chill with him. It's really fun because this is my first convention classic in a while. I've done a couple of outside fairs, but with pandemic and things like that, I haven't been doing too much, and I also don't have much experience tabling, and now I'm like a guest, and I'm like, what am I doing?
Everything is a learning. Everything is learning.
That's what you got to do.
Bike, right? You remember you used to bust your ass on the bike, and then you're riding it now.
This is funny because I don't know how to ride a bike.
Okay, we won't tell that.
No, that's fine.
Okay, so
I can rollerblade. I can't use a bike.
Okay, we got something going on. Let's do this, baby. So, here's the thing: like any good superhero, what's your origin stories? How did you get all started?
I started technically just. My mom used to get volumes of Vogue and W. I grew up in Manhattanville projects in Harlem, and I would just sit there and flip through every page. And my game for myself, the pile would be higher than me because I was like 4, and I would just tell myself a story out loud that connected every picture in the magazine, and I would do it for the whole pile. Like I always wrote. Back in the projects all the way through, I wanted to write fantasy and horror and sci-fi and like these weird, wild worlds. And I got really fortunate to be able to actually do it professionally, which is still, I did the math the other day. I've only been doing this stuff professionally about 3 years, and it's still really wild to me how much, I've been blessed to accomplish.
Yeah. That is great. Like 3 years, a lot of people have been doing it for a long time, and you're here. But again, that's your journey.
Yeah.
3 years.
And more important than the amount of work, I think, is 2 things. One, that I'm proud of the work I've done, because less work is fine as long as I own what I did here, right?
Quality over quantity.
Right, and then also the fact that I started writing short story prose and publishing it a little bit before any of my comic stuff happened. And combination of that and the time that I came into comics allowed me to really kind of rep who I am, both as a queer person, but also as someone who grew up in the projects and then lives in the Bronx, and where when they were asking for writing samples, I was sending them short horror stories about race and classism and werewolves, so I got to come into the game I'm letting you know this is exactly who I am. So you can't be mad later giving me notes why are you like this? So I warned you.
No, be who you are.
So getting to do things like in the Marvel Legacy voices, getting to write Blade and Hunts Point, things like that, or repping New York, because that's a big thing for me. I grew up literally across the street from the famous That McDonald's, the Jay-Z.
Yeah.
And a few years ago, it was closed, and that hit hard. The rest of the gentrification was weird. Every time I go see my mom, it's a little bit different, but that one hit hard.
Yeah.
And so it's important to me to, as much as possible, both in my personal and my license work, to kind of rep the world that McDonald's was in,
Yeah. Okay, so you talk about werewolves, right?
Always.
Right. Okay, cool. So, number 1 werewolf movie. Go.
Dog Soldiers.
We just became best friends. Because nobody knows about that movie.
It's so good.
Yeah, it's so. Oh, okay.
It's so good. It's Predator with werewolves, and it's got my homie from Rome in it, which most people don't realize, and it's brutal.
Oh, it's brilliant.
It's also, I like the fact that it's competent people against werewolves, you know?
That's
like
true.
like that's the thing. Like the fact is that they made the werewolves still scary when these guys are really good at what they do.
The thing is, I love like trapped in the house kind of
Yes.
stories. Like I'm a big John Carpenter fan,
Oh yeah.
and that is the vibe that I give off, like British John Carpenter.
Yes, definitely.
Movie.
I was actually recently listening to, I got the 45 of the Church's John Carpenter remixes, where he remixed one of their songs, and then the B-side is they remixed one of his pieces from Lost Highway, and it's so good. I've been writing to those two songs quite a bit.
No, I need to go and listen to that. I wanted to go and see him a while back when he was doing his concerts in Times Square.
Yeah.
I missed out, but
okay. Yeah, he remixes Good Girls Don't by Churches, which is like the perfect one because it is like the horror girl anthem, right? And so he does a remix of that that's just so good.
Okay. All right, I got one for you. I recommend you check out this movie called Cursed that recently came out. It's a good horror movie.
I think I saw stuff about it and I did not get it yet because I'm like slowly going back into horror, not because I don't like horror, but my wife does not like horror like at all, which means that like I either have to time it for when like I'm like, you're gonna be asleep, so you sleep in the other room so you don't wake up to the stuff on the screen, or we'll do it during the day where like then afterwards I'll let you have the TV. Like we've been slowly doing it, you know, like so. She's now watched the first 3 Alien movies, you know,
classics.
You know, which she's like, oh god, that's so gross. But then also they're just old enough that like the puppetry work during the day for her, like she can do it. But she's also like, oh god, the body horror, and I'm like, yes, the body horror.
Okay, so she's not doing Resurrection. You're not gonna, you gotta learn to taste all of it.
I mean, we're gonna watch. It's actually my fault we haven't watched Prey yet, so I'm really excited for that.
You're gonna enjoy that,
and like just slowly getting into like the horror stuff like I used to has been super fun.
Awesome, cool. All right, so since you're in the Bronx right now, and we just came out of this, what do we call this? The gap year. Gap year. You came out of it. What do you see it now from like I know you've been inside, but you probably like peeking out your window. How do you see the art scene in the Bronx and on the rest of New York City when it comes to
I think that there's so much more current acknowledgement of art and creativity from the Bronx that not only goes past the Bronx, but also is seeing its day at the same time, right? Because I think that a lot of times either the Bronx scene ends up being isolated, not by people in the Bronx, but rather by people outside of the Bronx who are judgmental people. So oftentimes it's isolated, and then it's not until kind of afterwards that stuff comes out of the Bronx. But I also see a lot more creative, like as more people, like my angle tends to be publishing, right? So like a lot of pro stuff, and as we see more people from the Bronx, like getting those book deals, and then more importantly than that, coming back. Like the past few years, a little bit before COVID, but even still now, we're seeing a lot more, like say YA writers are doing a lot of school visits, which is really huge. We have Bronx, the Bronx is Reading Festival, and all of their work, which I think that they do really tremendous work, both bringing people into the Bronx, but also showing the world what the Bronx is capable of. I think that some of the greatest struggles artistically is how often the rest of the world, and unfortunately some of our own in the Bronx, tell the kids there that creativity isn't an actual option, or that the goal is to get out. And I don't mean in that like this constant like everyone's shitting on it sort of way. It's more of because so often people are taught that like success is getting out of the Bronx, whether intentionally or unintentionally. There's less encouragement of the arts in general as like a way out other than like that big limited pipe dream, right? And there are middle places for that, right? Like, so encouraging kids from the Bronx to write that novel that they want or those comics that they want and to share them with the world, and that those stories are valid is happening more and more, right? And it's not about craft and it's not about creativity. It's about both getting heard and about telling those kids who want to do that stuff, giving them the confidence and tools to get it out there. You know, that, you know, getting that one book and finding out that writer's from the Bronx. How much does that change people? You know, like I worked at comic shops for a decade. When you tell someone that the person who wrote that book or drew that book is from their hood, that changes them. Like, you see it physically. You know, suddenly that kid that happened to come in once or twice is coming in every week because it's an option now, right? Like, and that's what I mean by it's not being like this malicious thing that it's not an option. You know, it's just when it's not visual. If you can't see it, you internalize the fact that it's not a thing. I grew up with very little sci-fi fantasy that had brown people in it, period. So it wasn't until sometime in college that I realized that all my protagonists in the stories I was writing was white. Not because I hated myself. Like, I actually happened to come from a family that was really strong from the get-go of making sure that I didn't suffer that particular trauma. But that because the books in the genres I want that got big did not have people that look like me and my friends, there was something internal that just accepted that we did not exist in those worlds. Until I started seeing books and other things where they existed, and I was like, oh crap, I can do this. You know, like, it's why, like, I have a mission of being like, often as possible, I'm going to have, you know, characters in the Marvel universe or DC be like, I bet, or, you know, something like that. Because just hearing them speak like you matters, you know?
I'm going to bring up a little topic, because this was the wildest thing I've ever seen. Did you see that What If Thor, Miles Morales?
I played the fifth.
Okay.
I think...
We don't have to...
I think Twitter is a bad place for critique. That's and I think that's the main issue that happened there right now.
I agree with you immensely, but even from being from the Bronx, like, there's some wild stuff. But let's not go down that road. Let's pull it back to, like, you were just talking about the organization's book read.
Bronx is reading.
Bronx is reading. I saw their event last month.
Yeah, so Sarasea has they do all year round stuff. Yeah. Like with bookshops, they're actually working to fund the store right now. Yes. So if you anyone watching this who wants to follow them on Twitter or, you know, like, help them fundraise, but like literally like just watching Black Latinx, you know, like, person in publishing, watching her really put her heart into that, you know, like, it matters, you know. Then you also have, you know, I worked with Violet Magazine and Fiacon for, you know, quite some time, and that grew out of the fact that there was it was shown to be disproportionate amounts of Black writers were not having their stories not submitted but accepted to sci-fi, fantasy, short prose magazines. A few years ago, there was like a poll that was done, and they realized only 1% of stories published by sci-fi, fantasy, short fiction magazines were Black people, which is statistically impossible unless there are walls there. And it's not direct racism. It's the idea of not having Black, you know, like, first readers and stuff.
Yeah, it's a weird thing when you like talking to people about certain genres, and they're looking at you like, you know about that? And you're like, I know about it.
Like I grew up with, like, my dad was like a Trek head who watched every single series, who, you know, told me stories of when he was a kid, and he used to pretend to be Iron Man, and his, you know, my godfather was Thor, you know, like in the playground. Like, we do it. It's just this weird understanding that other people don't think we do. Yeah. And other people who are more academic and clever than me have discussed the way that this relates to people's concept of the Black cool.
Yes.
And how, for example, the Black nerd is a different like entity, right? Because things like comics were not necessarily considered quote bad nerdy in Black communities or Hispanic communities in the same way that like the trope of the white nerd had, right? And this kind of disconnect of like the classic like Black is cool trope.
If you're a Black nerd, you're a token.
That's right, but
you're that character,
right? So but it's this confusing thing of you guys culturally interpreted these books differently. You were not ostracized for these things, right? And it's like, of course not. You look at the old 70s like graffiti artists, and you watch like the documentaries where they're sitting there talking about Frazetta art, and like it's different, right? And so there's this disconnect when you talk outside your community about the idea that like you like these nerd things, and you're like they're just things, and that's changing overall, but it's still kind of like another hurdle when you're trying to like be in those generalized spaces.
Right. I agree with you. I feel like we've broken down a few barriers because of the internet, and then self-promotion, you can go there and put your stuff out there and be found. I mean, even like people still don't talk about Kindred and stuff like that, which is really weird. It's like one of the best vampire series out there, right?
Yeah.
It's just like, anyway, let's try
deep size.
Yeah. We could go down this rabbit hole, but is there anything that you're seeing right now that you're not happy with, like in the community, like here in New York City, the Bronx, wherever you're at, or you want something change or something like that right now?
I think in general, anything that I would want to change comes out of the fact that the ways that we're improving are still growing pains.
Yeah.
So intra-community labeling, I think, is still a thing where it's like personally, I'm from South African American background, right? But I see a lot of still amongst ourselves making people choose whether they're Latinx or Black, or making them like putting them in categories where they're still supposed to only rep one, or supposed to rep Black or queer. Like that tends to be one that I encounter personally, and it's changing. And that's why I'm saying, like, I put a caveat in, there's still growing pains, and as we figure out how to both represent ourselves as larger communities and also as our other smaller communities, like the ways in which we have to be careful not to replicate the divisions that were already forced on us. But we're getting better at that. So it's like,
it's overcorrection. It's like why did you messing up that word right now? Pendulum swing.
It's like when Miles Morales was first introduced, right? And I remember even amongst our own communities, having people being like, "Wait, he's like Black and Puerto Rican. Like, is that too much? Or like, is it like which one really is he?" And it's like he is, And like, there's still some people who struggle with that, but overall, those voices are losing power or learning, and
I mean,
it's a good look.
I mean, like anything else, those things do pass away over time. I mean, I think the thing is like we're just like we're that kind of creature that we like to put things in boxes. Like a friend of mine explained it to me one time. Like if you go to the forest, everything lives in harmony, right? Nothing labels it. But as soon as man shows up, that's a flower, that's a plant. This plant is poisonous.
And I think honestly, some of the missteps come from the fact that like we've had certain steps back because we're so isolated because of the pandemic, and that changes. The increase in digital events, for example, is very helpful with that.
Well, I just got a signal to wrap this up. So can you give me like a word or quote or a sentence that inspires you and maybe can help inspire the rest of the people out there?
I'm going to go for really wacky and weird. Yes. So you're going to be told a lot that your story might be outlandish or too much or too weird. But remember that in my favorite game, Yakuza, which has some of the best emotional beats, I think, of any video game series, you also have a bowling competition where you win a rooster who manages your housing. And the reason I say this weird ass sentence is because your story can be as weird and wild as you want, but if you work on your craft and you work on your passion for the story and you commit to it fully without being ashamed of it, your story is going to be dope. And it's important to remember that because a lot of people think when we write sci-fi, fantasy, and horror that just being hood or being black or Hispanic or being from the Bronx is that thing that makes your story unbelievable. But it's not. It's the thing that makes your story believable to the people who are told they don't exist.
Yeah, appreciate that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. This is awesome. Super fun.
Yeah, this was great. And guys, remember, follow us at Tokyo. Is there a way they can find you?
Yeah, oh, yes. Mostly Twitter, also Instagram, but not so much right now at Weredogs, WEREDAWGZ, because I have a brand and it's werewolves.
And you can find us at Tokyo's Bronx. Follow us on IG and YouTube. Subscribe, all that good stuff. And we'll see you later. Kurumatata.